the ancient rice trick that's revolutionizing my garden, and why your soil microbes will thank you. Here at the Soil House, I'm always on the lookout for simple natural ways to supercharge garden soil without breaking the bank or relying on synthetic fertilizers. And honestly, this rice trick has become one of my absolute favorites. It's so ridiculously simple that when I first heard about it, I thought, there's no way something this easy actually works. But after using it for the past 2 growing seasons, I'm convinced it's one of the most underrated soil building techniques out there. So what's the magic? We're talking about using plain ordinary rice to cultivate beneficial microorganisms and attract earthworms that transform your soil into a living, breathing ecosystem. No fancy equipment needed, no chemistry degree required, just rice, water, and a little patience. Let me walk you through exactly how this works and why it's become a cornerstone of my soil building strategy. Before we dive into the how-to, let's talk about what's actually happening beneath the surface. When you introduce cooked rice into your garden environment, you're essentially laying out a feast for beneficial microorganisms. These tiny workers, we're talking about bacteria, fungi, and other microbes, are constantly searching for carbon-rich food sources. And rice is like an all-you-can-eat buffet. As these microorganisms colonize and break down the rice, they multiply rapidly, creating what's essentially a microbial explosion in your soil. This process doesn't just increase the sheer number of beneficial organisms, it also improves soil structure, enhances nutrient availability, and creates the perfect conditions for earthworms to thrive. And we all know earthworms are nature's tillers, creating channels for air and water while leaving behind nutrient-rich castings that plants absolutely love. What makes this technique particularly brilliant is that you're not just adding nutrients to your soil. You're building a sustainable ecosystem that keeps working long after the rice has broken down. It's the difference between giving your garden a fish versus teaching it to fish, if you will. The most popular way to use this technique is through rice water fermentation, and it's become my go-to method for creating what I call liquid gold for the garden. Here's how I do it. I take about half a cup of unwashed white rice and rinse it in a jar with roughly 2 cups of water. The key here is unwashed rice because we want to capture all those starches and the native microorganisms on the grain's surface. After swishing the rice around for about a minute, I strain out the rice, which I then cook and eat, no waste here at the Soil House, and pour the cloudy rice water into a clean jar or bottle. Then I add about a tablespoon of milk or a teaspoon of sugar to feed the microorganisms. Cover it loosely with a cloth or lid that's not tightly sealed because you want air exchange but you don't want debris falling in. Now comes the waiting game. I leave this mixture in a warm, dark place for about 5 to 7 days. You'll know it's ready when it develops a slightly sour, fermented smell, kind of like yogurt or sourdough starter. If it smells rotten or putrid, something went wrong, and you'll want to start over. The goal is a pleasant, fermented aroma, not a biohazard. Once your rice water is fermented, you've created what's called indigenous microorganism solution, or IMO for short. This liquid is absolutely teeming with beneficial bacteria and yeasts that are native to your local environment. I dilute this solution at about 1 part fermented rice water to 20 parts regular water, and then I use it to water my plants and drench the soil. Now, if you want to take things up a notch and specifically target earthworm populations, there's another rice technique that works phenomenally well. I've been using this method in my compost bins and directly in my garden beds with incredible results. The earthworm population in my vegetable garden has easily tripled since I started this practice. Here's what I do. I cook plain white rice without any salt, butter, or seasonings. Once it's cooked and cooled, I bury small amounts, maybe a handful or two, about 4 to 6 inches deep in my garden beds or compost pile. The location matters here. I typically place these rice deposits near the edges of beds or in areas where I've seen earthworm activity, as they tend to have established networks there. Within just a few days, you'll notice earthworms congregating around these rice deposits. As the rice decomposes, it creates a warm, moist microenvironment that earthworms find irresistible. They feed on the rice itself and, more importantly, on the microorganisms that colonize it. It's like setting up earthworm restaurants throughout your garden. I refresh these rice deposits every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season. The beauty of this approach is that you're not just feeding earthworms temporarily, you're training them to establish permanent tunnels and networks in those areas. Over time, you'll see improved soil structure, better drainage, and richer, darker soil in zones where you've been applying this technique. Where this technique really shines is when you integrate it with your existing composting and mulching practices. I've started incorporating rice fermentation into my composting routine, and the results have been remarkable. When I'm building a new compost pile, I'll create a layer sandwich, browns, greens, a sprinkle of rice, either raw or cooked, then a splash of diluted rice water ferment over the whole thing. This accelerates the composting process dramatically. What used to take me 3 to 4 months to break down now happens in 6 to 8 weeks. The rice acts as both a carbon source and a microbial inoculant, jump-starting the decomposition process and ensuring that beneficial organisms dominate the pile rather than potentially harmful bacteria. I've also experimented with using rice water ferment as an activator when I'm creating lasagna gardens or new no-till beds. When you're layering cardboard, compost, and organic matter, dousing everything with diluted rice. Ferment helps those layers knit together faster and ensures microbial activity throughout the entire bed rather than just at the surface. For those of you growing in containers or raised beds where space is limited, you can create small fermentation stations right in your planters. I take a small jar, bury it up to the neck in the soil with some holes punched in the bottom and sides, and fill it with rice and water. As it ferments, the microorganisms gradually migrate into the surrounding soil, essentially creating a slow-release microbial inoculant. Now, I'll be honest, not every batch works perfectly, especially when you're first getting started. The most common issue I see people encounter is contamination with the wrong types of microorganisms, which results in that rotten smell I mentioned earlier. If this happens, don't pour it on your plants. Just toss it and start fresh. Temperature plays a huge role in fermentation success. If your area is too cold, fermentation might not happen or will proceed very slowly. I found that the sweet spot is between 68 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. During cooler months, I ferment my rice water inside the house in a cabinet. And during summer, a shaded outdoor spot works perfectly. Some gardeners worry about attracting pests with buried rice, and I understand that concern. In my experience, when rice is buried at the proper depth, 4 to 6 inches, and in reasonable quantities, it doesn't create pest problems. The key is moderation. Don't dump a huge pile of cooked rice in one spot. Distribute small amounts across your garden, and the earthworms and microbes will process it before surface pests ever discover it. If you're dealing with very heavy clay soil, you might need to amend the area first before the rice technique works optimally. Mix in some compost or aged manure to create initial pore space, then introduce the rice. In pure clay, the rice can sometimes create anaerobic pockets that lead to unpleasant smells and less beneficial microbial activity. Timing matters when implementing this rice trick, and honestly, I've developed different strategies for different seasons. In spring, about 2 weeks before I plan to plant, I do a heavy application of rice ferment and bury cooked rice in my beds. This gives the microbial population time to explode and the earthworms time to establish their networks before I'm putting sensitive seedlings in the ground. During the main growing season, I switch to maintenance mode with lighter, more frequent applications. I'll water with diluted rice ferment every 2 to 3 weeks and only bury rice in paths or areas between plants where I won't disturb roots. This keeps the microbial activity humming without interfering with established crops. Fall is actually my favorite time for aggressive rice applications. After I pull out summer crops, I heavily mulch beds with leaves and compost, then bury rice throughout and drench everything with rice ferment. Over winter, earthworms and microbes work their magic, and when spring arrives, I have the most beautiful, friable soil you've ever seen. So, how do you know if this technique is actually working? Beyond the obvious increase in earthworm sightings, there are several indicators I look for. First, I check soil structure. Healthy, microbe-rich soil should form loose aggregates that break apart easily in your hands but don't turn to dust. When I squeeze a handful of soil, it should hold together briefly, then crumble when I poke it. Plant performance is another huge indicator. In beds where I've been consistently using the rice technique, I've noticed faster germination rates, more robust root systems, and plants that seem more resilient to drought and disease pressure. My tomatoes, in particular, have shown remarkable improvement, deeper green foliage, and significantly better fruit set. I also pay attention to water infiltration. Pour a bucket of water on your soil and watch how quickly it absorbs. In my rice-treated beds, water disappears almost immediately and doesn't puddle on the surface. This tells me that earthworms have created good pore space and that soil structure has improved. The smell test matters too. Healthy soil should smell earthy and pleasant, like a forest floor after rain. If your soil smells sour, sulfurous, or just off, that indicates anaerobic conditions and an unhealthy microbial balance. Rice-treated soil that's working properly has a rich, sweet earthiness that's unmistakable. I get asked constantly why someone should bother with this rice technique when they could just buy microbial inoculants or earthworms from a garden center. Here's my take. Those commercial products definitely have their place, but the rice method offers something they can't: adaptation to your specific local conditions. When you ferment rice water, you're cultivating microorganisms that are already present in your environment. These are the organisms that have evolved to thrive in your climate, your soil type, and your local ecosystem. They're not generic microbes grown in a lab somewhere. They're your soil's native population, just multiplied and concentrated. Plus, the cost difference is staggering. A bottle of commercial microbial inoculant might run you $20 to $30 and last for a few applications. Rice? I can buy a 10-pound bag for less than $10, and it'll keep me in ferments and earthworm food for an entire growing season. For those of us trying to garden sustainably and affordably, that math makes a lot of sense. And let's talk about earthworms specifically. You can absolutely purchase earthworms to add to your garden, but unless you've created the conditions they need to survive and reproduce, you're just feeding the birds and other predators. The rice technique creates a sustainable food source and optimal habitat that encourages earthworms to stick around and multiply naturally. If you're ready to try this technique, and I really think you should, start small and observe. Begin with 1 or 2 garden beds or a section of your compost pile. Make a batch of rice water ferment and bury some cooked rice in a test area. Keep notes on what you observe over the following weeks and months. Pay attention to your specific conditions and adjust accordingly. What works in my garden here at the Soil House might need tweaking for your climate, soil type, or growing situation. That's the beauty of this technique. It's flexible and forgiving. You can experiment, make mistakes, and still see benefits. Remember, building truly healthy soil is a marathon, not a sprint. This rice trick isn't going to transform your garden overnight, but applied consistently over time, it creates fundamental changes in your soil ecosystem that support better plant growth year after year. You're investing in the future of your garden, creating a foundation that gets stronger with each season. The gardeners and viewers who've embraced this technique at the Soil House community have seen remarkable improvements in their soil quality, and I'm confident you will too. It's one of those rare gardening practices that checks all the boxes. It's cheap, simple, effective, and completely natural. So grab some rice from your pantry and let's get started on building the kind of soil that grows incredible food and flowers. Your earthworms are waiting, and your microbes are hungry. Let's feed them. If this article helped you understand how to implement the rice trick in your own garden, make sure to subscribe to the Soil House for more practical, science-based gardening techniques that actually work. Share this with your gardening friends who are always asking how to improve their soil naturally. They'll thank you when their gardens start thriving. And drop a comment below sharing your experiences with this technique. I read every single one, and I love hearing how fellow gardeners are building better soil. Let's grow together.